Sourced from 60% certified wood fibers and 40% recycled waste plastics, Naia Renew cellulosic yarn is intended to make sustainable style possible for everyone. Naia Renew can be used to create luxurious fabrics with a silk-like finish, rich luster, and wonderful drape, or soft cocooning materials for everyday comfort. To learn more, visit naia.eastman.com.
Welcome to today's BOF Live. We are talking to Daniel Roseberry, who for 1 year and 3 months has been the designer at Schiaparelli in Paris, which actually makes him one of the new standard bearers of haute couture. And this seems like a very interesting moment to be talking about haute couture with Daniel, apart from the fact that he has many interesting opinions about it. This seems to me a moment when people are reassessing fashion. People are looking at people are searching for new ways to make fashion relevant and give it meaning, make it sustainable, and these and other issues, to a very large degree, are addressed by haute couture in quite unexpected ways. So, Daniel, welcome.
Thank you.
I would like to ask you right off the bat, what did haute couture mean to you in your evolution as a designer?
What did it mean to me before this
you
whole
actually
thing?
became a couturier?
I think it meant to me probably what it means to everybody who studies or loves fashion. It was really, kind of the pinnacle of fantasy. I always, I have visions of Lacroix, Saint Laurent, that kind of, even like Carl from the 90s, like that was when I really started to notice fashion, and it was through couture that I became obsessed with fashion. But it was really, I would say, probably this idea of fantasy, that this unreal level of luxury and beauty that was almost like beyond a human level in a way. That was what it meant to me.
And you've been working in fashion for how many years altogether?
This will be my 12th year in fashion. Yeah.
So when did couture assert itself as this sort of, fantasy fodder for you?
Say it again, sorry.
When did couture assert itself as this kind of fantasy fodder for you? When did you were working for Thom Browne for all that time. You were working on very, very rigorous ready-to-wear that really shifted the boundaries of ready-to-wear completely. So,
I mean, my experience at Thom was so, and you know this better than most people, so what he was doing in New York was groundbreaking, and really was not even some of the shows. And that was the thing I loved about Thom, is some shows were really ready to wear and some shows were really not ready to wear at all. And, I think that it was approaching as close to a couture process as you could get as far as the rigor. I remember one season that we did, where he came to me. It was the first women's show in Paris, and he had an idea, and he came to me and he said, I want to do the entire show made out of tulle, the entire collection. And that was the brief that we worked inside of, and that he guided us through. But it was really, it was really beyond ready to wear. And I think that there's nowhere else in New York I could have worked that could have prepared me for the kind of hours that go into a garment, the kind of rigor that we had at Thom Browne, for sure. So Thom Browne was the first time, obviously, that, it's my only other job before Schiaparelli in fashion. So that was my first foray into this kind of approach. But really it was, a teenager when the Style Channel came to town, and watching, Fashion File and Video Fashion and all that kind of stuff. I was just transformed as like a teenager, 13, 14-year-old in Dallas. So, yeah.
Dallas was a pretty dressy city, wasn't it? I mean, a lot of couture clients said you must, when you were out and about, you must have seen some pretty. I mean, I know. What is it? The hair.
The huge Texas hair.
The hair is high to heaven or something. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, like putting a hole in the ozone layer kind of hair. No, it was. I mean, that was not my Dallas. I came from a very, we lived outside of Dallas in the suburbs. My dad was a priest, and we were, really not a glitzy family. We're a very artsy family, but not a very glitzy family. But because my dad was a priest, I had a tuition basically to a sort of fancy school in Dallas. And so I would go from my weekly life at home in Plano, which is exactly looks how it sounds, to going and staying in Highland Park at my friends' houses and just completely, that was really like what changed me, I think, was seeing the way that the way the homes were decorated, the way that the women were dressing, and Highland Park Village, these really, like, as you said, like, it's kind of like LA. Dallas has like a little bit of that LA glam, even back then and even more now, I think. So it was fascinating. I got both sides of the story, kind of.
So as a sort of psychological, as a bit of a psychological backdrop, fashion would have seemed like a real escape for you then.
Yeah. Yeah, it always was something that I was interested in that no one else around me knew anything about, other than consuming. But, I never, ever remember until I went to FIT. I never remember having a conversation with anyone in my orbit that really was interested in fashion. It was always something that was kind of my left of center kind of attraction. And I mean, for a lot of reasons, the church being one of them, fashion became like this kind of, as you said, like an escape for me. And I ran all the way here, I guess. I mean, it was really that, it was a really dramatic running away, not a rebellion necessarily, but a real exodus when I did leave. So
I have to say that, from Plano, Texas, we're talking to you today in the Place Vendôme in Paris.
Yeah, yeah.
So, the sort of beating heart of haute couture. And you're actually in Schiaparelli's original studio, aren't you?
I'm actually, at the moment, I'm in the attic of the Place Vendôme. I'm on the 5th floor. And yes, like when the company was restarted and our owner restarted everything, he bought back the original salons and the whole space. So it is surreal, to say the least, beyond.
It's the interesting point, I think. Fashion was by force a sort of private pleasure for you. You said you didn't have anyone else to talk to about it. And then couture has always struck me that its strength is that it is a private pleasure as well. Mm-hmm. And that I mentioned at the beginning, the things that equip couture for this particular time. The notion of preciousness is very important to couture. It's not disposable clothing. Mm-hmm. Also, which makes it a sort of sustainable thing, but also the private pleasure of couture. There's this debate, we've been talking about it a lot over the last 6 months, whether fashion will evolve out of this into something that's more discreet, or whether extravagance will still. And fashion's and couture's a funny paradox, because it's like discreet extravagance in a way.
Right, completely. And that's, I think, the nature of the client too. I mean, I think the real couture client is someone who is more discreet than we would think, or than I definitely thought. But the nature of what they're investing in is it's like an essential extravagance for them, and I find that really fascinating, just rare today to see somebody investing in an extravagance which is an extravagance for them, you know. And I think that that's, you're always going to have clients who, you know, or influencers or people who are outward facing, you know, embodiments of the brand in a way. But the real backbone of our couture business are really these women who shall remain nameless, who are very, very discreet. And it's really a personal pleasure for them or a passion for them. And it's just fascinating, really. And it's something you really don't get as much in ready to wear. So it feels like this bizarre and amazing microcosm to be, you know, finally a part of in some weird way.
So that I wonder if that clientele is a sort of early adopters in one way, in that they're quite social media averse, aren't they? You know, I was talking to Michael Halpin, who's a wonderful, I guess, demi couturier in London, and he said once his dresses leave his studio, he never sees them again.
Right, totally. I mean, that's, I think, one of the biggest joys that you can have as a designer is to know that someone is really wearing and living in and loving your pieces, and also the pieces that you create with the atelier, because it's different than, I mean, I think that the kindredness that I feel with the members of the atelier here, it's very different for me than it felt in ready to wear, where, I mean, obviously it's not made at a factory, you know, over in Italy or overseas or whatever. I mean, you know by name every single person who's worked on a piece, and many times it's one or two people. So there's a real connection between, yeah, I mean, you can't look at a garment and be like, in a way, it's like, that's not mine at all. That's like a collective effort in a way that I had not experienced before. But yes, it is a huge honor, and it's surreal to see things, to know things are out there and not be seeing them.
But the things that you've been doing, some of the things you've been doing have been so extraordinary, and so in that what, 15 months since you've been at Schiaparelli,
yeah,
complex and elaborate. I mean, sometimes quite cerebral in the elaboration, but nevertheless real showpieces.
yeah.
And it is, I just find it so bizarre that they go somewhere and they have a life somewhere.
Right.
But what is that life?
Well, now I feel when we start working on the collection, we think about this one, like, you know, everyone's always like, who is the Schiaparelli woman? Who's your client? Blah, blah, blah. For me, I've never, and maybe this is my Tom Brown upbringing, but I've never really like hung my hat on one specific person to be like an archetype for whoever I'm designing for. But we do model the design process after, you know, how I kind of perceive the personality and the life of Elsa herself, because my whole thing is like, what would she be designing today if she was alive? You know, it is, in a way, it's a performative act, you know, designing for somebody as iconic as her. And what I love about her is that she was this kind of rigorous professional during the day, and she wore these, you know, straight shouldered, you know, skirt suits, and there was always some surreal twisted jewelry or some subversion of some kind. But then at night, she would throw these kind of insane parties, like costume parties, and dress up like things. And there were these real, you know, I mean, it was a reality versus a surreality, you know. And I think that when we're approaching the collection, we think about it in the same way. There are pieces that now we can look at and say, that's for this client, that's for this client. We know exactly who will go for those real world pieces. And then there are other pieces like I think it was last night or 2 days ago, Regina King wore one of the Schiaparelli gowns to the Emmys from the last couture show. And for me, like when a gown like that comes out, I'm like, I know it's going to have a home somewhere. It's just a countdown until it finds the right home. And, you know, So there is like, it's rare to sell one of the more insane pieces unless it's a collector's item to one of the real clients. You know, I think she wants something much more real, much more forever, much more functional. So
Do you mean that Regina King was wearing a Schiaparelli outfit with the Breonna Taylor t-shirt?
The pink suit that she wore with the Breonna Taylor t-shirt was Scap, ready to wear. But then there was a virtual red carpet, and she wore that sapphire blue gown with all of the stones all over it for the virtual red carpet. So we had a date night with Regina the other night.
Oh,
Was great.
that completely contradicts what I just said about when the dress leaving the studio, you never see it again. That's an interesting. That's a sort of, I mean, apart from the fact that she is probably my favorite actress at the moment, and Watchmen was my favorite TV show.
Beyond.
It's my favorite TV show.
Yeah.
Schiaparelli, the way that you have configured it, does attract, I imagine, a certain kind of person. Whether you can't say whether it's, you know, you can't define it, but nevertheless, there is.
Yeah.
You have to have a certain appetite for life to respond to what you've been doing, I think.
The word I always think about is just something a little alternative, because this is like alternative couture. Because if you want a huge, you know, extravagant tulle ball gown, you know where you can go to find that. And I think that for me at Schiaparelli, we're not going to do that. We are not. I mean, there's always a place for that kind of, you know, major shut the red carpet down moment, for sure. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Have you ever done that?
Not at Schiaparelli, but I feel like, you know, no, at Schiaparelli, yeah, we did like the Beyonce gown,
yes,
which shut down, you know, like it's always something that it's one of the best parts of the job, is that like conceiving and also designing for this really inspiring people. I forgot where I was going with that. What was the question? It was, anyways, that's one of my favorite. Yeah.
Yeah. There's always that place for the shut the red carpet down moment, and then just before that.
I mean, it was really like the quieter moments, I think, are what are more, in a way, almost even more interesting. They're more nuanced. And like you said, they're more relational. And I think that that's something that's really been coming to the forefront in the midst of everything that's been happening, is just the relational aspect of couture becoming more and more important. And more, I mean, it was the heartbeat of couture before this, and I think it will be even more. That a lot of these people who are buying couture, their lives have been less affected probably than most people's lives, and their love of fashion and that kind of essential extravagance that we were talking about isn't going away, you know. So I think that it's through those personal connections that we can continue to evolve, I think, in the realm of couture specifically.
So what has been happening over the last 6 months? I mean, there was during the digital couture days in Paris,
Yeah.
you made a film about drawing the new collection.
Yeah. Yeah.
And another, actually, yeah. I'll ask you about that, because it's interesting how you have inserted yourself into the story. Like when you did the show in Paris, you sat on the runway drawing the collection as the models, as the outfits walked all around you.
Yeah.
And I thought it was you introduced. That was your first big show. That was you introducing yourself to the fashion world.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was. There's not that sense of, you know, I'm the backroom boy.
No.
No.
And I think that a lot of it comes from the fact that being from Plano, Texas, being an American, being such an outsider, I think that there's something that that can resonate with people about seeing, like, the whole concept behind that show was, and we kind of revisited it with the film over quarantine, was the dichotomy between the life that I was living. I was sleeping on the floor at my friend's apartment, designing a couture collection in Chinatown without really knowing, without having the job. It was a proposal. And then, a month later, I was in the Place Vendôme getting the job. And I found that I remember walking to work. It was December, or walking to the studio. I was unemployed. I'd left Tom Brown and I didn't have anything to do. And I was literally putzing around Chinatown. And then I got an ask to make this proposal for SCAP. And I just remember what I was listening to music. I was walking to the studio with nothing to do. And I said, like, this is so amazing that if I got this job, that the clothes that people would see were conceived in this dirty, freezing cold shithole Chinatown studio. And to me, if I had seen something like that when I was 16 and had been given permission to dream on this level, like, that is what it could have changed my life earlier, And I think that that's part of why I just find that so compelling in a weird way. And I wanted people to know I'm not a trained couturier. I'm not, I wasn't brought up in the French houses, but that doesn't mean I don't have something interesting to say and don't have something to contribute to this world of couture. So that was kind of why. And then when I was working on Collection Imaginaire, it was a similar thing. I was in lockdown in New York. Everything was happening. It was right in the middle of the protests and everything that were happening, Black Lives Matter, everything. And it was this incredible moment in the city. And it was right when the couture shows would have been. And it was just such a stark contrast that I wanted to highlight that and say, even through all of this, even with so much has been taken away from us, I could still go to the park, Washington Square Park, and sketch out a 35 look collection, and that could somehow be enough in that moment, and that's kind of, it felt like a weird deja vu in some twisted way.
But in drawing that collection, you actually did draw a collection. It wasn't just wishful thinking. You were actually designing outfits. What happened to them all? What happens to them all? The collection, what Imaginaire you called it. Yeah.
So it was a collection that at the moment only could exist in my imagination. And what we've done is we've actually received requests from celebrity stylists and from a few clients that they would be interested in going through the process of having those pieces created for them for an event or just for whatever. So the idea is that we would actually bring to fruition. And we're working on, I actually just launched the first pieces yesterday. And this is in tandem basically with the new collection that we're launching for the end of January. So, we're not going to produce the entire thing. And it also, the film itself was the moment, it didn't exist in order to delay, giving us a moment later. But I think that we'll have some really great, red carpet, whenever the red carpets happen again, we can have some great red carpet moments off that collection too. So
whenever the red carpet happens again.
Yeah, the digital ones, are great in the meantime, but it's not the same.
Another interesting thing about couture is it kind of exists outside the normal fashion calendar. I know it's shown twice a year during clearly defined days, but it's much more of a sort of fluid proposition, made to order. It's the customers are getting in touch with you all the time. It's sort of evolving. A collection evolves beyond the point that you actually offered it to the world.
Totally.
So those people who you mentioned not having suffered particularly, and God knows every day you pick up the newspaper, and I don't know why they think it's a good idea to balance all the tales of hardship. with the
Right.
stories of these people who just made like $58 billion yesterday.
Right.
It seems to encourage a sort of revolutionary strand of thinking. But those women haven't been coming to you and saying, could you, I really need not red carpet either. I need this. You mentioned.
You know what? Yeah, I think like, it's not to say that like things, we're still proceeding with, producing the orders that we had from the last collection. We're still like, steaming. I think that the house itself shut down, of course, like for some time, and we're really just getting started again. So as you said, it's a year-round global. I mean, that's one of the most amazing things about it. It's like we're always at the ready to take care of whoever we need. And that part is really starting up again. And it's going to be really interesting to see how the tastes of the clients have changed, because even no matter what has happened to anyone financially, everyone is from a lifestyle point in a different place. So I think that we'd be looking at when we do, and when we do take orders, they're going to be different kinds of orders than they were before. So, whether that's more comfortable pieces or more cozy pieces or pieces that feel less event oriented and just life oriented, that's something that I've been thinking about a lot for the next collection. And I mean, obviously all of us have. So, but yeah, we're just really getting started back up here again.
I think in the spirit of Schiaparelli, your clothes are some of the clothes you design are extremely eccentric. And I would imagine that has a sort of intellectual appeal. That Schiaparelli's clothes have had a life in history quite outside the fact that they were fashion garments. They became symbolic of the art of the time, that they were
completely
like a Picasso or a Cocteau or something.
Right. And I think that, that's her legacy, which is, I mean, if I could do that today, or if anyone can do that in fashion today, like I'm ready, but chasing that dragon to create museum pieces. I mean, I always think about things going to museum, but trying to replicate what she did, which seemed to be also so effortless and such a product of the time and place in which she lived, would be I think a very arrogant disaster for me to do. So I'm just like, I think that her legacy is so pure, it's so untouched. When she shuttered the house, it didn't have a Carl to bring it forward over decades. It really stayed, shuttered. And I think that I'm very much trying to respect and honor and embody her ethos, but I think trying to replicate it in any way is trouble.
Why do you say you think about museums? You like the idea of your clothes ending up in a museum, do you?
Of course. I mean, I think if we're not chasing that level, I think that it's because we can do that here. We can do museum ready pieces from a quality perspective and hopefully from an intellectual perspective as well. That's definitely something I want to work up to. This is my third season here, and I've been thinking about that a lot too. And Tim, like, I think I speak for a lot of designers when I say that, like, the amount of time that you're given as a designer starting at a house is so brief these days. I think you get probably 2, maybe 3 seasons before people start having the conversation. And I have these conversations too. Is it working? Is it not working? Like, we're ready to move on, And I love reading old reviews. I love reading, I dive into those like old Guesquière Balenciaga reviews or I was recently looking at the Riccardo Tisci at Givenchy review. There was a real evolution there, you know, and that the designers were given a chance to not only learn about what it means to work at a new company, a new country, a new atelier, everything, but also learn about your own design process and how you approach how you want to approach what you want to say. And I think that that's something that, you know, I worked at with Tom for 10 years, and I thought I would understand what it would feel like to go from being somebody's right hand to being the person who has to step out at the end of the show and wave, you know, and say thank you. But I had no idea. Really, I had no idea. And
What do you mean by that?
I had been, you know, because at Tom, we would always be on the backside, and I would always watch him. I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but it's really my story. Like, I would watch him go out and take the bow and then come back. And I would always, you know, I was so proud of him. I was so proud to be there, but I would always also wonder, like, when's it my turn? And I think that I thought I knew what it would feel like. I thought I knew what the pressure would feel like, or I thought I would know like what it was like to maintain a vision throughout the entire creative process. You know, when there's so many opinions and when there's so many moving parts and when there's so many personalities involved. And I think that is the challenge. The challenge is not really having something to say, it's maintaining that line of thought through the months of the creative process. And it's something I'm getting better at, you know. And as you said, like, my first show was imperfect but brave, which is, like, honestly an amazing compliment for me. But I want it to become more perfect. I think it's something I'm working on.
It's interesting you mentioned Riccardo at Givenchy, the evolution of Riccardo at Givenchy, because by the time he left Givenchy, if you said the word Givenchy to people, they would think of what Riccardo Tisci had, how
Completely.
Riccardo Tisci had remade the house. Now,
Completely.
do you think at Schiaparelli that there is, and you see for Givenchy, there's always Audrey Hepburn, you know,
Right.
there's always this
Right.
image. And so there's this benchmark that everybody gets judged against. And then he made that house into Riccardo Tisci's house.
Right.
Would you enjoy the prospect of Schiaparelli becoming, of your personality being so eventually infused into the house of Schiaparelli that people could only think about it in the terms of your aesthetic, your creativity? I know you say that you are very, very conscious of what she achieved in the work you're doing for the house. But as you look at it now, do you think, that's a Roseberry?
I would hope that what I would do here, what I do here, would be that strong and that intense, that people could look at a gown and be like, oh, that's Daniel at Scap. And I don't think that that has to take away from her and her legacy at all. You know, Carl's legacy really doesn't compete with Coco's. It's really like side by side. And I do think that we're living in that time where people really crave to feel the person behind the creation. I think that the stronger you can make the personality, that through line between who I am and what I want to say and what we're putting out there, that has to be completely synced up. And I think with all the people like Phoebe, you know, like, you really felt, I mean, there wasn't like someone like competing with her at Celine as far as like a legacy goes, like the founders, you know, it wasn't the same thing. But I think you look at the people who are really clicking with their audience, and it's the people who are really expressing like themselves in their work. And it is a personality thing. Like, you have to be able to go there, I think. And I am.
Charisma plus. Now, you talking about museums and this, about the coming out of this situation, and how one thing that you can see is the importance of the relationship, that people feel a relationship with the house through the designer. If I said to you that, you know, that stupid $1 million question that is being asked literally every single year I've been working in fashion, is couture dying, or what is the future of couture? And I know you have something to say about an industry which seems so bent on painting the future quite black for itself in a way. You know, you said nobody else asks what is the future of what they do, like the way fashion says, what's the future of this?
I think that this moment has really revealed to all of us, and I know you feel the same way on some level. Like any thinking person in fashion knows this, that this moment, this global meltdown, everything has revealed to fashioners our own, irrelevance on such a deep, deep level. And I think that it's not to say that self-expression is irrelevant, or that the love of fashion is irrelevant, or that the power of fantasy and imagine, like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the bones of the industry in which we, like, it is built on, for me, like, very flawed ideas of how to, it's really like to brainwash people into thinking that I like have to like control myself, because I could go really dark about it, and I don't want to do that. But I do think that fashion has to get real with itself right now. I know when this started, the pandemic started, that everyone was asking, is this when fashion's really going to change? Is this when things could really shift? Is this when our, we could attempt to have some sort of moral high ground here, because we're one of the most wasteful industries. We're, one of the most materialistic. We're one of the most, exclusionary, all those things. And I just, I feel like we have to really reassess and really admit that there is something irrelevant about what we bring to the table right now. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be relevant right now. Fashion shows don't have to be relevant right now. There's so many other things that are more important. And I wish that fashion people could allow themselves to sit with that discomfort. And I think you're right. Like, people ask, what is the future of couture? What is the future of this? What is the future of, like, fashion is so obsessed with predicting itself, and I think it's because we deep down know how, like, sort of not essential we are in some ways, and I think that there's an insecurity there. So I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about it. I think everyone in a creative role here in the industry has, and I'm not saying I have all the answers, but it's definitely something that I just hope we can allow ourselves to be uncomfortable and to listen to what the answers could be.
But when you're working at the level of couture, though, you're obviously liberated from, a lot of the concerns that that dog other designers. You've talked about designers like Galliano and McQueen, who were just completely overloaded with responsibility, and at some point creativity and self-care and all sorts of things suffer. In your situation, do you feel, you're talking about making clothes for women who don't have to worry about being the furlough running out on their job or anything? Is it kind of liberating to be in a situation like that for a creative person? That obviously you have your sense of social responsibility, but at the same time you are making clothes that exist in a gorgeous bubble, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's a very, we're not really wasteful here. Everything is made in house. It's really, we don't have to engage with the underbelly of the industry.
It's not disposable clothing.
No. And so, yeah, it does feel like a luxury of conscience or something maybe, but I still, feel connected to the larger family in which we all are members in a way. And it's and we are starting to make ready to wear too. Like we are doing that. We just did our second ready to wear collection last year, and we're about to release our third one next month. So, you know, we are not just a couture house here, but it's true. It is true. But, you know, that could change also really. I mean, the industry itself is not really changing. And at Thom Browne, when I started, there were, you know, 12 employees. And when I left, there were like over 100. You know, those things can happen so fast. And I think that the industry just isn't really in a place to support that healthy growth sometimes. So
you made a really great analogy, I think, between the fashion industry and the film industry. And the film industry came to be dominated by titans, as the fashion industry has come to be dominated by titans. So you have you had Louis B. Mayer in the film industry, you have Louis Vuitton in the fashion industry. And then at some point, there was this kind of conceptual shift, and independence suddenly had this power that they never had before. And you had the 70s in film, which were just like this golden age in American movie making of independent directors coming through, and a new wave. I suppose in fashion, we have had that in the 90s. There was a sort of, I think the 90s in fashion were a bit like the 70s in film. There was that sort of explosion of creativity on so many different levels. But with that analogy, how do you see, you know, we've seen what happened to the film industry. We've seen how giantism is kind of, you know, it's just not working. The Tenet, which was going to save the movie business, hasn't saved the movie business. If you tip that analogy into the fashion world, what do you see? What do you think that this is going to be? Ultimately, this is going to be a good thing for independent designers. Do you consider yourself an independent designer in a way?
I do think that, you know, we've been talking a lot about having sort of like a startup mentality here, because we are, even if it is a storied house, it is a really small, I mean, not really small, but a really, you know, kind of more precious kind of endeavor than a lot of those huge, like Bruckheimer level of houses, you know. And that's what I think, that when you look at the big guys and the way that the quantity of pieces that they're producing per item, and it's just, there's no way for me to make that many of something, maintain a certain level of quality, desirability, and the definition of luxury. And you know, I think that now, like, I always think about, like, you know, couture is probably the closest thing to that kind of prehistoric way of getting dressed, where like one person would make one garment for another person, you know. And you look at the kind of price tags that you have to engage with in order to get that level of, you know, care and service and everything and quality. And I just, you know, I do think that as these houses become huge, that there will be, and I think you already feel this, and it's definitely not fully evolved or fully thought out yet, but I do think that there will be a moment again for smaller houses to produce things that feel more personal, more precious, and that will become meaningful again and trendy again, because it has to be, you know, it has to be something that feels trendy too in some sick way in order for people to get back on board. But yeah, I mean, I also, everything put in the context of social media, I mean, everything we knew about the way history was cycling through doesn't really matter anymore, it seems. So it could be an all of the above answer as well. I don't know. But I do think, to your question, I do think that this will be a moment for smaller houses, for sure.
And the designers in those smaller houses will become more important, because, as you mentioned before, there's going to be this personal relationship between the designer and the customer. I mean, it's interesting what I've heard a few things coming out of China that in, this first tier, second tier, third tier business and the huge cities there. But advanced Chinese customers, the people who are bringing fashion back in China are looking for basically names that no one's heard of.
Exactly. Totally. Do you remember, like, I don't know, when Alessandro started at Gucci, it was right when Demna started at Balenciaga. And before that season, there was this weird no man's land of nothing happening in fashion. And everyone was saying, what is going to happen? What's the next thing? No, it was like a sequence of very boring fashion weeks. I remember this was like probably like 8 years ago or something like that. And then Demna came out at Gucci and it was like changed the game. Something new came out. Then Balenciaga, and the two of them kind of like introduced this new resurgence of activity. And it feels to me, I feel like we're back into like a little bit of a barren wasteland as far as we don't know what the answers are to these things. We can't really even anticipate it. It's really going to come down to talent, and new talent working today and coming and showing the way for something new and different. But fashion is so obsessed with analyzing itself for whatever reason. I don't know if you know the answer, but
I love analysis.
yeah. So anyway, but probably because we're full of Virgos too. This industry is chock full of them.
Full of Virgos. Happy
including
birthday.
Thank you, you too. So anyways, that's, I definitely do think so. And I think that we're hopefully right at the beginning of that next wave for sure.
And do you feel yourself as part of that, of that next wave? You've been received, as a sort of unknown quantity in a way. People are fascinated, I think, that in fashion for the last while, when there's been movement within houses, generally it's been a sort of slightly circular motion. And then Daniel Roseberry comes along and people were who'd at a little bit.
Totally.
Has that been good for you?
I've really enjoyed getting to meet and know people here and really just try and be myself. And I have felt really graciously welcomed, to be honest, by the French press specifically and by the US press. And it's been really great. And I have felt embraced and kind of like people are rooting for me in some way, in some, and so even in some small way, but for me, like, it's definitely been something that I haven't felt like people have been against me for the most part. And that's been really nice. Really nice.
But do you think the air of mystery was useful? That, people look at you and they think there's a man with a tale to tell, like an ancient mariner or something.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think there was a curiosity at the beginning too. And maybe there still is, I don't know, but I definitely still feel that I am just finding my groove, and the first collection was orgasmic, as you said, and the second collection felt more focused and like a step in a more kind of just in a more focused, more sure-footed direction. And then, as everything's been happening, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what's been working, what hasn't been working. It's such an amazing time to pause and reflect. And I'm so excited and, horny for the next show, because it's got to be, I hope it's January. We don't know, but I live for those shows. And I think that just a chance to be more focused is what I've been thinking about the most.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much. Praying for January and really looking forward to whatever comes next. But I think, getting back to me harping on mystery, there's a mystery in the clothes as well, and I find that really, you think about those clothes. So if that's your thumbprint, then keep up the good.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate you always. Thanks for the talk.
Thank you very much. Talk to you soon. Bye.
All right. Bye, Tim.
Bye.
Thank you.